All right. That was excellent. So much ground was covered. Really impressive. And no major tangents. I mean, that is very, very impressive. Brilliant. Welcome back to our panelists. It's really great because a few of you have already put some questions in the chat and in the Q&A, so I'm going to dive straight into those. But of course, if there are any other questions that you're still thinking about or that come up in this discussion, do add them in and we'll do our best to answer. We have about 15 minutes, potentially could run over a little bit. Let's see how we get on. So the first question was about the part when you were discussing empathy, which, was a key theme at a couple of points actually in the talk. And it's from Leah. So Leah is saying, loving the discussion about empathy being overvalued in our professions, or at least it's a constantly misused word. Don't we more often mean care or compassion? So I guess maybe also the question is, how would you define empathy, or what does empathy mean to each of you? Who would like to start?
I'll start, I guess, because I did mention it, I guess, first in the panel. Excuse me, I've just come back from holiday, which means I've got an awful cold because why not? Um, yeah, I don't even think you really need care or compassion. You just need to be able to listen. I think your active listening is a teachable skill, it's a learnable skill. I think, I think we do care. I don't want to be like, I don't think you can be completely uncaring. To be like in the kind of user research profession. So yeah, maybe something like care and compassion, but sometimes I interview people, I don't particularly feel compassion for them either because it's something very mundane, or it's something very, as much as perhaps I've done user research with people who are going through some kind of difficult circumstances, I'm not compassion for them. Sometimes I also use research with admin staff about the admin software they're using, and I don't particularly would say I care or have compassion for that. It's making me sound like a terrible person, isn't it? So yeah, but I think that's part of the exercise, is to think about, well, what do you mean? And that when you're doing things like recruitment, so this pops up on the reason I kind of raised this is because this pops up on recruitment adverts a lot. They say you have to have empathy, and that's like a big thing in the recruitment for a user researcher. And it's like, well, but what do you actually mean by that? When you're like, be more direct, be more clear when you're writing your job advert. Like, what do you actually mean by that? Do you just mean a good active listener? Because that's not the same thing. Or do you mean someone who has a lot of empathy and care because perhaps it's something that's more of like you're in the caring professions and stuff, for example, if it's something more down like that kind of health role. Do you mean that? So I think, you can, for me, it's just to think about what you actually mean. It's really important for neurodivergent people, like, because we don't really get, sometimes neurotypical people use words or social conventions we don't really understand, and it's always better to be like completely direct. So yeah, if you mean care, and that's the important thing for the role that you're advertising for, or the way you work, then yeah, use care or use compassion, or use listening or use empathy if you think it's right for you. But just think about it rather than just going like empathy and then not just like chucking it in like it's a buzzword.
A lot of job descriptions are like that. It's like all the buzzwords. You need to be organized, have great communication skills, be a unicorn, fly on the back of a horse. It's just, and it's well, I guess more and more, right? The chat GPT generated lists of attributes of any role under the sun. Claire and Shannon, do you have anything to add on empathy, or do you want to move to the next question? Claire.
Yeah, I guess I just agree with what Chad was saying. Like, it's a buzzword, it's UX jargon, isn't it? And actually, from my perspective, what we actually mean is listening to understand and listening to like believe people as well. Like, that's what we mean by empathy. It's like really listening to what people are saying and taking on board. And you can do that, as any person can do that. It's a skill that you can develop as well, so you get better at research when you are a researcher and you've done it lots and lots and lots of times. Yeah, I think there's sometimes the care aspect does come into it. If you're running research with vulnerable participants, for instance, caring and being caring and considerate is really important. But again, for my consultancy, when we're doing that, we have very strict guidelines that we create to put in place around that. So you can learn it. It doesn't have to be like, oh, it's part of your personality trait, So yeah, I think, yeah, it's about active listening. It's about listening to understand. And yeah, I mean, it's all skills that are learnable, I think. So yeah, I agree with what Chad said.
Right. Shannon, did you want to add anything, or should we move to the next one?
No, I think I'm okay. I think that Chad and Claire got it covered. I think
Covered
like
it.
mentioned, a general openness, I think, is what more of the kind of message that we wanted to share about research.
Thank you. So the next question is still about language, but a different part of the conversation. So throughout the conversation, actually, there was use of neurodivergence and neurodiversity. So the question is, I see these terms used interchangeably, but I think there's a difference in meaning. Could you explain what is the difference between neurodivergence and neurodiversity? Who would like to start?
I can go for that one if you like.
Go for it.
So yeah, I think it's really important to actually distinguish, as I hear a lot of confusion between the two terms, but they do really mean different things. I guess neurodiversity encompasses all people, all different types of brains and neurological capabilities, whereas neurodivergence specifically focuses on a subset of people within that who have neurological differences that can be disabling, such as ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. I think actually Caitlin talked earlier about disability discrimination highlighted as well that those disabilities are protected by law. So yeah, it's a very, very different between neurodivergence and neurodiversity in general. I guess when we talk about neurodiversity, we're talking about both neurodivergent people and neurotypical people as well. So yeah, there's definitely a distinction. I also think there's been some unhelpful and probably perhaps quite harmful discussion around like the increased diagnosis rates for ADHD and autism recently, especially in the media. And I think you hear more and more people say, oh, everyone's got ADHD because of mobile phones and social media, or I don't know, I've heard people say that everyone's neurodivergent in some way because they're kind of misunderstanding what it means. And perhaps that sort of media discourse is kind of supporting that as well. So yeah, I think also, especially with ADHD, some of those traits can be really relatable, but I think it's important to remember that just because you relate to some of the traits, it doesn't mean that you have a disability. And I think we mentioned in the talk actually, like, you know, that diagnosis rates are way behind. So I'll always advocate for people looking to better understand their brain or investigating gaining a diagnosis if they think that they're neurodivergent. But I think, yeah, sometimes the misunderstanding between neurodiversity and neurodivergence can sort of perpetuate harm if people think that everyone is neurodivergent in some way. So yeah, language is important, as we know. So I think it's really important to get those sort of distinctions right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Claire. Shannon, Chad, anything to add, or would you like to move to the next one?
I just wanted to add, like, I guess it's similar to like how you wouldn't describe an individual as diverse. So you say we have diversity, but you wouldn't say, well, people do say it, and this is a bit bugbear, but you wouldn't say, oh, here's a person of color, they're a diverse person, because it's kind of a grammatical thing that diverse refers to a population, and you wouldn't use it kind of in a singular thing. And like Claire was saying, neurodivergent kind of it's like the label for the section of society that's marginalized or discriminated against. And you know, you could say, well, actually, if we get to a world where that discrimination stops happening, then perhaps we won't use the word neurodivergent anymore, or we use different terminology. So it kind of reflects that.
You touched on a really good point around the evolution of inclusive language. Right now, these are the terms that we use, and it's really been really well defined just now. And at the same time, it's good to stay up to date with all the evolution of inclusive language because things may change in the future. Atif Chowdhury, the founder of Diversity and Ability, has this beautiful quote of, "We're all neurodiverse, but not all of us are marginalized by it." So that echoes what you've both been saying.
Yeah.
Yes?
add to that as well, actually, because I think it's especially important for hidden disabilities, because people can often think, oh well, that I relate to like being forgetful, so maybe, you know, that those struggles sound familiar to me, and it can be quite diminishing, I think, sometimes when people say that. By all means, if you think that you might have neurodivergence in some way, investigate it. But I think sometimes, you know, because probably we mask really well as well, people can think perhaps that our struggles aren't as difficult as they are. So I think, yeah, especially with hidden disabilities, it's really important for that.
And being really careful with the loose use of things like, oh, I'm having an ADHD moment. If you haven't got ADHD, like, or, oh, I'm having a BPD day. And I'm like, if you don't have BPD, not okay. Because it's a very different lived experience. And adding the stigma to the hidden aspect as well makes compound impact. Shannon, anything you want to add on?
Nothing major. I think I'm also even learning as I go. I feel like that's something that is really important to note, is like things in texts are always changing, and like, you know, different ways of expressing, you know, different things about people are constantly changing as well and moving. And so I feel like just continuing to learn like what fits and what doesn't, and what certain words mean and don't, and, you know, how certain groups identify and stuff is really important, I think. And yeah, like I feel like I even can't keep up sometimes with, you know, what one word means versus the other. I even had to remember, like, oh, what is neurodivergent versus neurodiverse? And now I have a better grasp of it, but I think, like, you know, things change so quickly all the time as well. So I feel like just making sure to educate, and you know, being okay with learning and figuring it out as you go as well, because I think a lot of people are learning new things too each time with a lot of types of disabilities, including, like we mentioned, the invisible ones.
Yeah, I think you touch on a very important point here around self-education, and also self-compassion and compassion for others, and not going into this, you know, that cancel culture of like, oh, you used the wrong word, so I'm, you know, mic drop and walking off or something like this. But no, as an opportunity and invitation to learn together and teach each other like all these different things. And also always respecting self-identification. Some people will prefer to refer to themselves with a certain word or a certain diagnosis or not a diagnosis, and that's obviously absolutely valid. And so to be prepared to ask somebody like, how, you know, would you like to talk about it? How would you like to talk about it? And then making sure to respect that moving forwards. We have a question then from Rosie. All of this resonates so strongly. I felt the same way watching the panel. It was really incredible. I've often struggled with a lack of understanding why I need to know the why and the rationale behind the piece of work, and clarification being read as a pushback or being challenging. I can relate to that, you know, when you ask your manager, but can you just explain, like, why do I need to do this thing? Because I just need to understand why, the purpose, then I can, you know, proceed, because then it makes sense, right? So the question is, do you have any advice on how to get that across in an effective way? Ooh, Rosie, you've challenged our panel. Or maybe they're just being polite with each other.
I mean, I have some ideas. I feel like I've talked a lot, but yeah, I mean, I feel exactly the same. I need context. I need, like, you know, to understand the logic behind why I'm doing something. I think it's fine to kind of communicate that as well, to kind of put your logic forward and say, you know, this is why I need the why. We actually use at my workplace user manual of me's. So I don't know if you've ever heard of those, but it's kind of like we're often forming new teams all the time because I work in a consultancy, and it's a kind of user manual for yourself where you kind of help people understand your best ways of working and like how you do your best work, you know, what conditions you need. And that's been quite helpful for me, particularly as I've understood more about my neurodivergence. So that could be a way that you kind of, yeah, like help explain you know, what you need to do the best work. And I don't think, again, I think it's about advocating for yourself and your own needs. And, you know, you can frame it in a positive way as well. You know, if you want me to do this task really well, I'm going to need that context. But yeah, hopefully your manager's responsive to that. I don't think it's a bad thing to be asking at all.
Thank you, Claire. I've just realized that we are on time. So if anyone needs to drop off, that's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for joining us. But if our panelists are happy, give me a thumbs up. If you're happy to stay another maybe 5 minutes or so, yeah, cool. So we'll make sure to answer the next couple of questions. But first, Shannon, on this question, any advice?
Yeah, I was just going to resonate with what Claire said. I think if you feel comfortable and open to share more information about yourself, like volunteering that information and explaining yourself a little bit more is often helpful. Like even saying the things that you said to us right here, saying that, you know, you do have trouble with a lack of understanding sometimes, or like you're not asking coming from a place of, you know, trying to be difficult or challenging or anything. I think it's really nice to share that if you feel comfortable and have that relationship with the people that you're talking to. Because I think sometimes people just don't even think about it sometimes. Like everyone's often wrapped up in their own world. They think like, oh, because somebody said something in some way, they must mean, you know, X, Y, and Z, when they actually literally mean something different, or isn't even trying to, you know, share any information between the lines. I think like, especially as an ADHD person, I think, at least I do, over explain a lot. Like try to give context, need to share like my whole life story before I answer any questions. And so I'm very used to doing that, but I also understand, you know, some people are not as open to that. But maybe if you feel like, you know, you're in a safe space, or maybe if you feel like maybe you can ask to have like a side conversation about, you know, what Claire mentioned, and be like, maybe we can just talk about in general how I communicate, or, you know, what I work best in, what kind of environment and stuff. And I think it helps people, you know, understand that with you. Because I even had that recently with my manager, where I realized like I was making both of our lives harder by not, you know, speaking up about certain things that I needed, because he didn't understand and I didn't, you know, I didn't feel comfortable, and it became this whole thing. But then I realized when I said something to him, he actually didn't care. He just wasn't really in the same headspace as me, so he didn't know what was going on. So I think just feeling like if you can share that information, I think it's helpful.
Had anything from you to add?
No, nothing to do. Claire and Shannon pretty much got it.
Brilliant. So maybe just to add a little model, I suppose, to call it that way. It's from dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT. It's an interpersonal skill called Dear Man. Check it out online. It's a very useful tool to prepare for that conversation. The D is describe, so describe the facts, what's going on. Express, that's how it makes you feel. A is assert, so therefore I need to understand the why. And R is reinforced. It will help me to be the best I can be at my job, and therefore perform for the team and the company. And then man is mindfully, doing it mindfully. A is act confidently and really stick to, you know, repeating, like broken record, repeating, stating the need. And N is negotiate, so being prepared to have some give and take. Maybe you can't get 100% of the time the why all the time, but at least for the manager to tell you, this time I can't explain why because there's blah 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 politics, I don't know. So yeah, just something to share with you. It's called Dear Man in DBT, a DBT skill, and super useful to prepare for this type of conversation. So finally, our last question, and maybe actually we'll go to Shannon first. I think you were the first one to mention it on the video, and if that's not true, then please correct me. So a few people on the panel mentioned having an ADHD coach. How did you go about finding a coach? And also, are there any resources you'd recommend for getting support with neurodivergent specific needs?
Yeah, I think we all mentioned maybe to some capacity good things and also challenges. I think it really depends on where you are, at least in my experience. Like when I was in the US, it was a different experience than, you know, I actually live in the Netherlands now. And I think here it's been a lot easier. But for the Netherlands, at least in Amsterdam specifically, there's actually a clinic that does work with ADHD specifically. And I had forgotten, I think I had a medication that I was on, in the US, and they needed to do a re-diagnosis here. And so I was able to go to my doctor and kind of tell them what was going on. And they referred me to this clinic. And of course, I had to wait, I think, half a year or longer to go through this. But when I went there and we did like an evaluation, they offered as a service to have an ADHD coach or like a CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy for it, but also like, a medical service. And like, it was a really long, I think like 3 or 4 months long process of treatment and things like that. And that's like the doctory medical kind of way to go through that. But I do know that there's also people on the internet now a lot more that offer ADHD coaching as a thing. I can't pin any at the top of my mind, so if Chad or Claire, if you guys know any kind of resources, that's super helpful. But I feel like it's because it's a thing that's been talking about a lot more now. A lot more people offer it. There's a lot more like resources out there to get somebody to, be a coach, or even like I sometimes, even when I know people that have ADHD or are newly diagnosed with it, I try to offer to help as well too. And so maybe, having a community like some people have mentioned in the chat could be super helpful as well. But yeah, I think it really just depends on where you are and, the resources that are available to you in the area, or how deep in the internet you go to search for it.
Rabbit hole. Another rabbit hole and a rabbit hole. Claire, I think you mentioned access to work on the recordings. Did you want to mention that here as well?
Yeah,
that's one way of getting a coach, I think.
Yeah, so through the government access to work scheme, you can gain, lots of different things to kind of support you with, your cognitive disability. It might be autism, it might be ADHD, it might be dyslexia. I have to say that the service is absolutely terrible, particularly for people who have ADHD. It's not designed very well. It took a lot of determination for me to get through it. And there has been some problems with it. I mean, it's a government service that just isn't run very well. My coach, however, is amazing. And I did get allocation to get a certain number of coaching sessions with her. And that was just luck. Someone I knew was a coach, and then she realized she had ADHD and became an ADHD coach. I mean, if anyone wants any advice on how to get through the government access to work thing, happy to give that advice. There's also, I know of a company called ADHD Works that offers ADHD coaching. Obviously, this is something that you could get privately as well if you wanted to pay for it without having to go through the government scheme. But if you can get through that government scheme, I'd really recommend it, because they will kind of pay for your coaching. It's just not the best service to get through as a neurodivergent person.
It's the irony, isn't it? Like for diagnosis as well, like you have to write and read all this bunch of stuff, and you're like, but that's I'm telling you that's the issue.
Absolutely. And like as Shannon said, like I've had so many conversations with people about gaining a diagnosis. I've actually put together a guide on how to gain a diagnosis. So if anyone wants access to that, I can share it. I think I'd explained it so many times over text messages and stuff. I was like, I'm just going to So yeah, I have that as a resource as well if anyone would like to see it.
Amazing. Chad, anything to add around ADHD or autism or any other coaching that you have access?
I'd say if you work for a larger company, it might be worth chatting to your employer and your kind of occupational health team. So in a previous employer, when I was diagnosed, I was offered coaching via occupational health. I didn't undertake it for kind of personal reasons, but you might have that stuff accessible through your employer. So it might be worth having a look at that. Otherwise, I guess like Shannon said, the community, I mean, I don't really have coaching. But yeah, the community are really helpful, like getting kind of tips and advice from other people and just trying a load of things out. I guess I've also used, there's a service called Free to Be Me Therapy, and they do therapy and coaching, but they're all of the all of the therapists are neurodivergent, so you kind of get that good understanding, and it's kind of, they do different versions of therapy and stuff like this. So I think there's quite a few kind of companies and organizations out there, but a lot of it is going to be trying something. And I think probably have this in common with some of the ADHD folks, that you have a technique and then it works for like a few months and then it just like stops working, and you're kind of having to constantly find new techniques. They've kind of got a bit of a limiting, once your brain gets used to it, you stop doing it. So there's going to be a lot of like personal experimentation as well as kind of that coaching thing. But yeah, definitely check out, if you have access to, like I said, larger companies. I know kind of some of the public sector organizations, the government departments will have something as well. So kind of like reach out through their staff networks are a great resource. Again, if you work in a large enough company that has staff networks, that can be really, really useful kind of group of people to talk to and find stuff out from.
And if you're an entrepreneur, there's a great collective called Joyfully Different. They're based in Brighton, but they cover all of the UK and even internationally. And it's a bunch of neurodivergent people like us starting businesses or being freelancers and supporting each other. So yeah, it's really great. So if anyone wanted to check it out. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you to everyone who stayed with us all the way till the end. I know we ran over a little bit, but we wanted to make sure to answer all of your questions in the moment, on the spot. So thank you for those questions. That's all we have time for today. But of course, if you have more questions, you can add some comments or reflections on the Slack channel. And then in 40 minutes or so probably now just 30 minutes or so, there's a workshop called Recovery and Renewal of Co-Design in Healthcare. So if you'd like to join that in a bit. And tomorrow we will come back with 2 workshops, and one of them is focused on neurodiversity, actually. So if you really enjoyed this panel, you may want to look out for any spots that are left and available. And it's called Brain Gain, Leveraging Neurodiversity for an Inclusive Work Culture. We also have talks under the theme of lived experience and a workshop on trauma-informed design. So, and then a coffee chat as well. So many things to look forward to. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you to our panelists. It's been a pleasure to host you and to meet you. And I wish everyone all the best. Take care of yourself and each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thanks. See you.